Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention. Ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure as the director of the Baker Institute to welcome you to our forum this evening. Early last month, Israelis headed to the polls in an election closely watched by the international community, and Bibi Netanyahu won the election and is set to begin his fifth term as prime minister, surpassing even Israel's founding father, David Ben-Gurion. What are the key domestic policy takeaways following these Israeli elections? What does another Netanyahu term mean for Israel's relations with its neighbors? And at a time when Jared Kushner has promised to release the Trump so-called deal of the century in the near future, I'm waiting with a bated breath. What is the current state of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, and is there any hope for a two-state solution? Obviously, critical questions. Here to answer these questions for us, we are delighted and honored, is Gilead Sher, our new Brochstein Fellow in Middle East Peace and Security in honor of Yitzhak Rabin. It's one of our most important chairs at the Institute. He is a senior researcher at the Tel Aviv Institute for National Security Studies, or INSS, where he heads the Center for Applied Negotiations. He was the chief of staff and policy coordinator to former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and he served as Israel's chief and co-chief negotiator at the Camp David Summit and the Taba Summit, respectively. He was appointed by Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin as a delegate in 1994 and 1995 for the interim agreement negotiations with the Palestinians. So you could see his direct professional experience in negotiations is pristine. Gilead has contributed to the Baker Institute's joint report, this recent report with the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace last September, entitled Two States or One. We thought it was very important to come out with, here are the facts. Here's what a two-state solution is and would look like. Here is what a one-state solution would look like. Of course, there's always a third option, the continuation of the very dangerous status quo. So we hope that this report will give people and public opinion some insights as to what the choices are. Our institute and our Center for the Middle East at the Baker Institute has benefited from Gilead's unique perspective as both an Israeli citizen and a multifaceted expert on the prospects for Israeli-Palestinian peace. I personally have known Gilead for many years. I will keep a lot out of this bio presentation, and have witnessed his commitment to work for Arab-Israeli peace. His remarks tonight will be informative for all of us to hear. So please join me in welcoming Gilead Sher to our podium.
Thank you very much, Ed, for this very generous introduction. And thank you, the Baker Institute, staff, and fellows for arranging this event. And thank you all for coming to listen to this lecture. I hope that we'll have enough time for questions and answers at the end of my initial presentation. I'd like to talk about a few topics that the ambassador mentioned. The first one would be kind of a very concise regional outlook on the challenges that Israel faces, the strategic vision for Israel in the Israeli-Palestinian context, takeaways from the elections, of course, my takeaways, the upcoming plan of President Donald Trump for the Middle East, perhaps a couple of words on Gaza, the situation in Gaza currently, and prospects for the future and the way forward. So first, a very brief historic context. We are at 100 years plus to the Balfour Declaration, which called for the first time to establish a national home to the Jewish people in British Mandatory Palestine. We are 70 plus years to the United Nations General Assembly Resolution 181, which called for the partition of the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea to a Jewish state and an Arab state. 50 years plus have passed since the 1967 war, in which Israel conquered the Sinai Peninsula, the West Bank, Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights, and we occupy since then, with a varying footprint, the West Bank. And we celebrate 25 years to the Oslo Agreement, the mutual recognition between Israelis and Palestinians, and the decision to resolve disputes between us throughout negotiations only. Now, Israel faces a multiple series of challenges in multiple fronts. As former Chief of the General Staff of the Army, Gadi Eisenkot, said yesterday in his first public speech in Washington, D.C. There is indeed a process of normalization with Arab states, those we have no diplomatic relationships with, on various fields of cooperation: security, cyber, agriculture, medicine, technology, intelligence, and energy. But all these relationships are below radar screen. And they will stay so unless a visible traction in the Israeli-Palestinian arena will be established. Because this is the only thing that will provide them the justification of the rapprochement with Israel. From the security perspective, of an Israeli security perspective, there is an inverse ratio between the severity and the imminence of the threats to Israel. In a declining order of severity, there's the Iranian nuclear threat, the Hezbollah in Lebanon, the Iranian presence in Syria, and Hamas in Gaza. In terms of urgency, the situation in Gaza could escalate again in the immediate term. In Syria, the Iranian military buildup proceeds. In Lebanon, escalation depends in part on Israel's decision whether to act against advanced military infrastructure and precision weaponry delivered to the Hezbollah. As to the Iranian nuclear challenge, Israel will act only if Iran breaks out to a nuclear bomb or other red lines are crossed. Now, needless to say that the recent US-Iran crisis and escalation is not crossing any one of these red lines. By the way, Israel's security apparatus thwarted more than 100 cyber attacks last year, most of them emanating from Iran. The political challenges of Israel lie in the very same four arenas. And we add to them the Trump's deal of the century and its consequences. We will talk about that. The situation in Gaza and the humanitarian distress there. The upcoming establishment of what seems to be the most right and far-right government ever to govern Israel. And preparation for the post-Abbas era in Palestine. The current status quo, as the ambassador mentioned, is a very dangerous slide towards a disastrous one state. Disastrous for Israel, for the Palestinians, and for the Americans. If we talk about a unitary one state, one person, one vote it will be either this or a non-democratic state. So either non-democratic or non-Jewish state. And it will be in a perpetual verge of civil war. If we want to secure the Zionist vision of a Jewish and democratic state in Eretz Israel, based on the constitutional pillar of the Declaration of Independence in 1948, we have to separate Israelis and Palestinians, the ones from the others, into a two-state paradigm. This will provide self-determination for Palestinians, and this will provide a Jewish, democratic Israel in secured boundaries for generations to come. So borders, to draw the borders now between Israel and the Palestinians is essential and urgent. I believe that it is the most critical decision for Israel to take in this 71st year of independence. The partition of the land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea into two distinct national entities. Now, the conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, can be resolved and should be resolved. And we are here at the Baker Institute, so let me remind all of us of the outset of the peace process between Israelis and Palestinians. There was Madrid Conference in 1991, orchestrated by Secretary of State, then James Baker, for George H. Bush as president immediately after the first Gulf War. And then followed up later on by rounds of negotiation on permanent status under President Clinton, President George W. Bush, and President Obama. And I believe that the perimeter or the broad brush strokes of a final agreement between Israel and the Palestinians were laid out in December 2000 by President Clinton, referring to all core issues of Jerusalem, the holy sites, the old city, of course, and then the refugees and the right of return, and then territory, boundaries, and settlements, and of course security and security arrangements. And I believe that this basis for further negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians will be probably what we will find at the end of the road if we continue negotiating towards a two-state solution. Now, many do not believe that this is possible, but I do believe that it is possible, and I think that if we look at history and we look at conflicts that were no less violent than ours, no less bloody than ours, no less protracted or long-term intractable conflict, such as Northern Ireland and the Balkans and South Africa and France and Algeria and many others, they were eventually resolved one day. So this will be the case of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict as well. I have put together an exhibition of an alternative at the INSS, the Institute for National Security Studies, by the way, launched by the President's Special Envoy, Jason Greenblatt, a year ago, on the alternative history of Israel, the history of negotiated agreement that changed the course of history for Israel and for the Middle East, rather than the history that is well known to all of us, which is the history of wars that we had with the years that all of us can cite easily. And if you look at the polls, the Israeli society is still, after all these years, in preference of the two-state solution over any other possible outcome of negotiations. But having said that, this issue of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was completely absent from the recent election campaign. And there was no debate on the way forward or on the prospects for peace. So I'd like to take a closer look now at the phenomena and the trends that were reflected in the last election campaigns and the elections themselves. First of all, nobody can deny that Israel is a vibrant democracy, that Netanyahu and Likud were re-elected democratically for a record fifth time. I believe that we will see, quite likely, that within about 2 weeks, beginning of June, a right-to-right-wing government will be presented by Netanyahu and inaugurated. There are various crises along the negotiations on the coalition establishment, but we will probably see those crises subsided until the date that he has to report to the president and to the Knesset. Netanyahu, as you know, Prime Minister Netanyahu faces indictments for very serious charges, criminal charges of corruption, including bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. And I believe that his predominant interest during this election campaign and afterwards was to evade court and possibly jail if convicted. I believe that one of the most alarming phenomena that we've seen is the endangering of the rule of law that was severely endangered, the slashing and the demonizing of liberal Democrats in Israel throughout the last 5 to 10 years, a very hawkish and polarized public discourse that is being promoted by those who won these elections, delegitimizing political rivals, delegitimizing the judicial system, the law enforcement bodies, the media, human rights activists and organization. And all in all, I would sum it up by saying that there is a rising tide currently in Israel, alarming, of populistic anti-liberal forces. They use democratic tools to reduce the democratic space of others. And there is, and this brings us back to the question of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This produces a resentment towards peace, towards promoters of peace, towards reconciliation with the Palestinians or with other Arab states, and towards compromise. But we have to differentiate between the society and the government, the society, the public, and the political level of things. Because in the polls, we have 58%, close to 60%, that are for the two-state solution. Among the Israeli Jews, okay, within the Arab society, it's even higher. There's about 40% for striving to reach a comprehensive agreement with the Palestinians, and other for transitional agreements to separate from the Palestinians. So the society, in essence, is not right-wing. But there is an absence of a strong, democratic, progressive, peace-oriented message, and this allowed Netanyahu and his allies to keep shifting the entire political system rightwards. He mobilized his natural allies, the ultra-Orthodox, the right-wing parties, the settlers, while on the other side, Benny Gantz, a political rookie, found himself a general, but with no troops. There was no message for peace from the center-left. As activist Jonathan Levy wrote in The Guardian a week ago, the center-left in Israel, and this is one takeaway that needs to be emphasized, the center-left in Israel is a majority that has been convicted. It is a minority and lost faith in itself because they dare not defend any clear ideological position, especially regarding national security and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The centrist message provided by the winning party that got a tie of 35 to 35 with the Likud, blue and white, the centrist message did not get through and will not get through in the future. So what should we expect to happen in the future? I believe that the Israeli left must find the courage to fight for its vision, including amending political cooperation with the Israeli Arab parties. We need a strong message, we need a vision, we need a mobilization of those who are for the ideas of progressive Judaism, liberalism, and of course, human rights and peace. Now, all this while facing a Trump, Jared Kushner deal of the century, or the ultimate deal, as it is called, in probably a couple of weeks. Now, I must admit that the team working on this plan, the ambassador, David Friedman, Jason Greenblatt, the special envoy, Jared Kushner himself, and President Trump, they keep the cards very close to the chest. But there were intentional leaks in the last couple of months, and more particularly in the last couple of weeks. And Jared Kushner appeared in the Washington Institute annual event 2 weeks ago. Now, I was there, and I listened quite carefully. I believe that the whole deal is over the heads of the Palestinians, that there's no going to be any political horizon for the Palestinians, no Palestinian state mentioned in the plan, and no resumption of negotiations or any kind of talks towards achieving a permanent peace. I believe that the core issues will be addressed in a kind of a dictation, perhaps, of the end game, not as the basis for further negotiations. And in consequence, no process is going to be started by submitting this plan. Its proposition of the plan is Israel's security and integrity of territory and Palestinian improvement of quality of life. That's it. Perhaps an economic package. I believe that the economic component in the plan will be quite important. Also, some incentives for investments and reforms in the Palestinian economy. But this, I believe, reflects a deviation of a 50-year United States policy that was based on, throughout Republican and Democratic administrations, was based on the two-state for two-people solution and United Nations Security Council resolutions 242, 338, basically land for peace. Some would say, like Rob Satloff, the head of the Washington Institute, that this is a reckless plan and it better not be unveiled at all. I believe that it is indeed irresponsible because it could bring an uncontrollable situation in Gaza and in the West Bank. I believe that it will face Palestinian rejection and Arab rejection and denouncement from various actors in the international community. But most importantly, it will be a blank check for a right-wing government in Israel to start an annexation process, a gradual annexation process. And let me remind you that, that this did not happen since the right Likud came to power in 1977 with Menachem Begin. So 42 years now since the right gained power for the first time. We had in Israel, during those 42 years, 17 governments, successive governments in Israel. This is the 18th one. And all but 2 of them were center-right or right-and-right governments. We had two governments that were labor governments, Rabin's in 1992 and Barak in 1999. Now, none of these governments, center-right and right governments, led by Likud and other rightist parties, none of them annexed a square inch of the West Bank territory or the Gaza territory. And if we start it now, well, we will need the help of God to see us get out of this situation. So, in my opinion, what needs to be done in order to overcome this kind of gloomy future of the Israeli-Palestinian arena? First of all, I believe that we need to preserve the conditions for a two-state solution, two states for two-people solutions, and we have to preserve the conditions for an eventual negotiated agreement that would come one day to the region. We have to create gradually a reality of two states in the absence of a full-fledged agreement. And there's on the shelf myriad plans, schemes, initiatives for what I'm just for what I'm speaking about now. All of them are centered around an Israeli initiative, not an Israeli reactive conduct. I believe that the INSS plan is a good one. I believe that Blue-White Futures plan is a good one. The commanders for the security of Israel have a very good plan, and they're not so different from one another. But the principle is that it is Israel's initiative. It does not provide a veto right to neither the Palestinians nor the European parliaments or any international fora. I'm talking about a gradual process, a transitional process that is three-pronged. The first one is, of course, Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. I mean, this bilateral way of negotiating between Israelis and Palestinians is the only way to achieve peace, facilitated by America, perhaps by others, but this is the only way to achieve peace. So that's the first prong. The second one would be regional. We have a lot in common with our neighbors and beyond our neighbors, common concerns and common interests that we have to explore together, and this will also affect, as I said, the Israeli-Palestinian context. But the third and perhaps most important prong or track would be independent, constructive steps that each one of the parties could take that do not negate the two-state solution, but contribute to the creation of a two-state reality. For instance, Israel could unilaterally declare that it has no sovereignty claims in the long run on areas that are not within the large settlement blocks that are adjacent to the 1967 lines or eastwards of the security fence. For instance, there could be a legislation providing voluntary evacuation, compensation, relocation, and absorption for those of the settlers living outside the settlement blocks, about 100,000 settlers, who wish to relocate themselves now without any agreement or decision of the government. And of course, we need the national planning not to repeat the mistakes that we made in the Gaza disengagement, which was in 2005 by Ariel Sharon as Prime Minister, a very courageous and correct strategic decision, but conducted lousily, security-wise, society-wise, economy-wise, etc. So we need to draw lessons from that. I believe that we need to differentiate between the blocks of settlements comprising 80% of the settlers the large blocks of settlements that are adjacent to the Green Line, the 1967 lines, and of course the Jewish neighborhoods in East Jerusalem that are going to be part and parcel of Israel under any agreement, any scheme, any arrangement ever. And all the rest, the remote settlements, those who are isolated or within the depths of the Palestinian area, that's going to be the state of Palestine. We have to differentiate between the two. It's not the same rules applies on both. I don't think that we need to force settlers to move, to relocate now, but we will decide on the fate of the settlers in the isolated settlements in due time when an end of conflict is in sight. And the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces, will stay for the time being in order to provide security until reaching an agreement, because with no security, there's no hope, there's no stability, there's no future to any agreement. And the Arab Peace Initiative, which is the proposal of the Arab League from 2002 and reiterated since then almost every year, the Arab Peace Initiative should be reviewed, should be modified, because many things happened in the Arab world. The Arab League is not what it used to be, and we need to invigorate this peace proposal of many Arab states in a new format. But I think that the most important thing is to speak about a process, not about a one-off symbolic step or measure taken, but about a continued process that would be managed and binding and benchmarked as need is. The game changers for this would be the young generation, both Israeli and Palestinian, the civil society, the political mobilization in both societies, and a mindset carving throughout conviction that this is the way to move forward. But for that, we need a new paradigm. The paradigm or the formula that I was negotiated according to, and my successors afterwards and my colleagues, was nothing is agreed until everything is agreed, which means that once you have a secondary issue that is not resolved, you cannot resolve the conflict because everything is not agreed. So it's about time that we replace this paradigm by whatever is agreed or mutually coordinated is implemented. As simple as that. Creating attraction on the ground towards a two-state reality and then a two-state solution. And of course, we need international help. It's like a kindergarten here. We need someone to facilitate that, to lock us in a room, lock the door, put the key in the pocket, and let us negotiate as much time as it takes. So perhaps, looking again at the international quartet, the US, Russia, the EU, and the United Nations, and also the Arab quartet, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, UAE, and others. Let me say a word about Gaza. Gaza is 140 square miles of distress, and the last round of confrontation in Gaza was the most lethal, violent, and accelerated one. We had 700 rockets in 48 hours, paralyzing the Negev, the western Negev, from Ashdod and southwards. And the ceasefire that was achieved, I believe, would be, we will see its collapse sooner rather than later. It's a separate problem, Gaza, but it has to be part of a comprehensive solution. And the solution is to be a bit simplistically, I will put it as a long-term truce equals rehabilitation, reconstruction, aid, infrastructure, etc. Something like the 2014 ceasefire agreement brokered by Egypt in order to allow the PA, the Palestinian Authority, to enter into several critical areas of control in Gaza. But we need modest benchmarks. We need attainable and measurable milestones, and we can achieve that as well. I do understand the Palestinian desire to have a state of their own, despite having dozens of Arab states that across the Middle East and beyond. But the leaders, up to now, the leaders of the Palestinians, never faced really their people and never clearly stated to their own constituency that they are calling for compromises. And the Jewish people, just 14 million people worldwide, has one single state as home. And we attempted in Camp David, in Taba, in Annapolis, throughout the Secretary Kerry's round under Obama in 2013, 2014, to achieve this, the two-state solution. I stand here and I'm saying we failed, but who said that 25 or 30 years are enough to negotiate such a complex and multidimensional conflict? Our Prime Minister Rabin was assassinated 24 years ago by an Israeli Jew, he was attempting to reach such a solution as well. This was his goal. So right now, we cannot leapfrog towards a comprehensive, full-fledged resolution of the conflict that would end the conflict and put a finality to all claims. This is impossible at this point in time. But we need a more gradual, transitional, interim-based, and even-handed, realistic peace plan. I believe that such a plan, if anyone in Washington listens, would improve America's influence in the Middle East. It will start to increase, and Iran's ambition will be curtailed. The likelihood of such a process, such a plan, is not very high. There's even slimmer chances for a full-fledged agreement in the foreseeable future, because at present, both Abbas and Netanyahu nurture fears, concerns, threats. We had no real partners, that's right, even when we negotiated and we produced concrete proposals, but that doesn't mean that we have to deepen the animosity. It doesn't mean that we have to be apathic to the Palestinians. And I believe that the step-by-step approach is realistic and stands a chance to succeeding. If it does, it would make Israel Jewish democracy it is set out to be. It would provide freedom for the Palestinian and statehood for them as well. And if it doesn't succeed, I believe that there is real value in presenting a plan that offers hope to both peoples and a peaceful future for them and for the region. Thank you. We'll take questions.
Just raise your hand. So please, no speeches. Questions.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, you first. Go ahead.
So for years it's been said that this is the end of the two-state solution, and every single event, whether it's an embassy in Jerusalem or many other events, is there a point where you would say this is the crossing of the Rubicon, we can't go back and the two-state solution is dead? Is there something you could identify, such as the annexation of Area C in terms of some deal for immunity for Netanyahu, or some other thing that you think this might be a point where we can't go back to a two-state possibility? Or do you think this is just a permanent possibility? Because you are very optimistic, which is encouraging.
I think that there is a point of no return. I don't think that we've reached it yet. I believe that certain steps taken are irreversible. That if annexation starts, it will be almost irreversible, even if we see a 180 degrees change in the American administration and in the Israeli government. Okay, so better not try.
About having two separate states or two states under one federal government?
This question comes up quite often. There's several schemes for federation, confederation, and other one homeland, two states, one state, two homelands, whatever, all kinds of proposals. The INSS, we've been analyzing annually the various plans and schemes that people promote, and according to a set of 12 criteria of stability, security, all international standing, etc. And we are in the opinion every year that the two-state solution is the only way to yes. What you see here is a recent poll about the support to a two-state solution, which I said is almost 60%. If you want to do a federation, if you want to create a federation or a confederation, either trilateral, Jordan, Palestine, and Israel, or just a dual, Israel and Palestine, you first need to draw a border, okay? Which is what I hope that we will be doing in the coming years. First a provisional border, and then perhaps a permanent one. Once you have a border, you can federate whoever you want with whoever you want. Yes, please. Yeah, okay, you go ahead, and then you.
All right. I was wondering how you want to overcome the idea that within, as well as within the Israelis, there is a kernel of thought among Palestinians that from sea to sea is ours. I mean, ours, the Arabs.
Never heard that.
I did.
Never heard that.
Palestine is ours. They mean the whole.
Okay, let me address that. It's a good question because it's this part of the blurring of the situation in reality. I personally have negotiated thousands of hours with the Palestinians under official, non-official, and semi-official heads in the last 25 years. They are, at least they're, both the society and the elite, the political elite, they understand that they will get 22% of British mandatory Palestine. And we will get 78% of British mandatory Palestine. Unfortunately for them, the Arab world rejected the 1947 resolution of the United Nations for the partition of Palestine, 55% to Israel, 45% for the Palestinians, for the Arab state. They rejected it unanimously and immediately, while Ben-Gurion and the other leaders of Israel that was in inception at that time, accepted it with a lot of pain, but they did accept that. So now, what is the debate about? That we don't get more than 22 than the 78% that we are allowed to, and that they do not get less than 22% that they are allowed to. Look, let me give you a couple of figures, and we'll proceed to the next question. First, let me talk about the size of the territory. Colton, can you? Okay, that's okay. This is a good map because. Okay. Well, okay. We are here, right? Okay. Colton, can you put the map of the West Bank, please? The interim agreement? Yeah, this one. No, this is a security fence. Yeah. This one, exactly. So the West Bank altogether is 2,180 square miles. That's about 3 times Houston. Okay? So that's the West Bank, 6,000 square kilometers, while Gaza is 141 square miles. What you look at here is the how it looks now. Okay? And how it looks now is that you have areas. Area A are the orange parts here, the cities, Jenin, Tulkarem, Nablus, Ramallah, Jericho, Bethlehem, and Hebron. 7 cities, Kalkilia, here, okay, in the west. So that's about 20% of the West Bank. Then you have the rural, what? No, 20% of the West Bank, 20% of the area of the West Bank. Then you have the rural areas, the yellow ones, okay, area B, where there is a Palestinian civil control and an Israeli security control. Now, these areas comprise also 20% of the area of the West Bank. The largest portion is area C, which is exclusive Israeli control on both security and civilian spheres, where this is 60% of the territory. All the settlements are here and some strategic areas that we keep for ourselves. That's about 60%. Now, this is not controllable for a long time, right? It's not feasible for a long time. It was supposed to last for 3 to 5 years, between 1995 and 1999 or 2000. According to the agreement of Oslo, the interim regime, the interim agreement should be replaced by a permanent status agreement that resolves all the core issues within 5 years. But we are now in the 24th year of this agreement, which looks like a kind of a Swiss cheese. And you see in every stain like that, you see there's a lot of friction from 360 degrees between Palestinians, Israelis, terrorists, etc. I mean, I don't have to explain. So this basically is what they are supposed to get as their land. But we have built along, especially here, okay, and around Jerusalem, we have built settlements since the mid-70s and until today. There's about 500,000 people living in these settlements, excluding Jerusalem, where we have 250,000 people. And they expect to get this back from Israel. But if we annex part of the territory, we exchange Israeli land against that in order to compensate and leave the proportions 78% to 22%. Colton, if you can put the Olmert map, right. This is the proposal that Prime Minister Olmert made to Mahmoud Abbas in 2008 at the end of the Annapolis process. The Annapolis process was a very serious permanent status negotiation process brokered by George W. Bush, but the main actors there was Condoleezza Rice, his Secretary of State. And Olmert offered to annex those blue areas here of the settlements, you see here, okay, comprising 6.3% of the territory. And he would compensate with these lands painted in light brown here, Israeli land from westwards and northwards of the 1967 lines, 5.8%. So almost equal. And then he added, you will get 0.5% to compensate for the missing difference, the safe passage between Gaza and the West Bank, 47 kilometers, like 30 miles or so, okay, between the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, in order to create a single territorial unit for the Palestinian state. I've never heard any Palestinian talk about the river to the sea or anything like that. Sorry to say that. Yes, please. Next one. Okay, go ahead.
Have you seen any evolution in the attitude of the Palestinian leaders toward making peace?
It's a very good question. As I mentioned, I never heard any one of them address his own public and saying, look, we're going to have an independent state. It will be a bit handicapped. It will be demilitarized and not totally sovereign, because the airspace will be confiscated by Israel, and the electromagnetic sphere also will not be free for us to use, etc. But this will be our homeland and our state. We will get statehood, independent statehood. We will have to waive the right of return into Israel proper. We will absorb our refugees that would like to come over to stay with us in Palestine. We will compromise in order to terminate our national struggle in a way that would provide us with independence. I've never heard any of them say that, address his own constituency. But I did hear many of the negotiators tell me that this kind of deal, or the Clinton parameters, or what we achieved in Camp David and Taba, and even the last partial round in 2013 and 14, led by Secretary Kerry, they were ready to accept that. Whether there is an evolution in their capability to face their own public and say what needs to be said, that's a different question. I don't have a good answer for that. First you, and then you.
So, if you could just go back to the slide that had the
No double questions.
to the poll that you had conducted.
Excuse me?
Could you just go back to the poll that you had conducted?
Yes. You want the next one? Because there's a better one.
No, this one's fine. So between blue and white, merits and labor, they only captured 34%, roughly 34% of the vote. And since this poll says that this is only Israeli,
Only Jewish.
Right.
Only Jewish.
that means that 24% of Israeli Jews who favor a two-state solution voted on the right, roughly. No, on the right, because
Okay.
34. So the question is, how does the center left bridge that gap, especially when you see that from 2006 to 2018, there's a 13% loss in support for a two-state solution?
If you have a good creative idea, I'd like to. But let me show you the next slide, because it's important for the answer. Okay. So, can you read that? Can a peace agreement with the Palestinians be achieved in the near future? You get the same, almost the same polling percentage. 60% do not believe that it will happen in their lifetime, or that the other party, meaning the Palestinians, would like to reach that. It's almost a mirror image of the Palestinian polling in Gaza and in the West Bank. Almost the same. only the percentages are a bit lower. But still, this is the leading proposition, the two-state solution, even under Hamas in Gaza. But you're right. This is why I said that the Israeli society is not right-wing, exactly because of that. Yes, sir.
So I want to piggyback on his question, because if I'm not mistaken, after the election, Shas captured 8 seats, United Torah Judaism captured 8 seats. If the...
Okay, you see the election? This is the result. These are the results.
Okay.
What you see here is that parties are not important, but blocks are important. The block of the right stops here. Okay? Here, okay, 65.
Okay, so my question is, with the showing of the ultra-Orthodox and ultra-nationalist bloc, where is the political will going to come from to follow through on your suggestions? There has to be a political will.
The ultra-Orthodox were traditionally indifferent to any solution. They don't care. Whoever gives them the funds that they need, they are with him. And they don't care. The largest settlements, by the way, the largest settlements, the fastest growing settlements in the West Bank are the two ultra-Orthodox ones, Beitarili and Modi'ili. Okay? And they don't care if the border will pass on the eastern side or on the western side of their settlement. They don't care about that. Shas, let me remind you, Shas was part of Eli Barak's government, supporting with Rebbe Ovadia Yosef, supporting the peace process and supporting a two-state solution. So they're not necessarily supporters of a right-wing, no agreement platform. And I believe that a strong message from the center-left, based on some of the figures that we presented here, but a very strong message also about cooperation with the Arab parties, not Zionist Arab parties, but Arab parties that are not anti-Israel. I believe that this can gain traction, and when Shas and the ultra-Orthodox will do this analysis of the balance of power, once there is a strong message of the center-left, and it will get traction, I'm not sure that they will stay where they are now. And this will create a political change, might create a political change. Go ahead.
You have there that the Arabs have 10 seats, but aren't there more Arabs that could vote that would make?
Yes, of course.
Larger?
Yes.
Why don't they vote? Because they could change the government.
I agree. This was a big mistake of the center left, that they did not address the Arab the Arab vote, and the turnout of the Arab vote was lower than the national average this time. Not only them, there's the ultra-Orthodox got stronger. Okay, the Arab vote and the Arab representation in Knesset became a bit weaker by 3 seats. Okay, I believe that once they feel that they have with whom to cooperate on the national level, that they are equal citizens, as they are, by the way, but the feeling and the perception is important much more than the figures and the data and the dry facts. The feeling of cooperation, of solidarity, will bring them back to the ballots. I believe that. So,
how could we have peace in the Middle East when the main backer of Israel is the United States and has been waging wars on Arabs ever since Lyndon B. Johnson beginning in Yemen, and it's been one perpetual war after another. So how could we really even talk about establishing peace?
Or this is a question for a new lecture. But I'm not sure that I have the time to address this one.
We're going to have one last question, and I'll go to that young person.
So you talked about negotiations with the Palestinian Authority, and you talked about how they're much more reasonable than I think the public perception would make them out to be. And so if that's the case, and a two-state solution is hopefully able to be achieved.
Can you speak up, please?
I'm sorry. If it is the case that the Palestinian Authority is a lot more reasonable and a two-state solution is to be achieved, what's stopping Hamas, which we know is a much more extremist ideology? What's the course of action in terms of getting them to negotiate on the same side as the Palestinian Authority and getting them to work together towards this two-state solution, since we know they're not exactly on the same page in terms of their ideologies?
If I understood you correctly, you asked me about the reconciliation between Hamas and Fatah, or?
Yeah.
He asked if there's peace with PA.
Yeah, well, we've seen since 2006, 2007, we've seen several attempts to reconcile, to form unity governments. They've all failed. They were very short term. But I believe that this should be a goal or an objective of any talks with the Palestinians. I believe that the regional level of negotiations that I mentioned as a part of the three-prong, if you remember, bilateral, regional, and independent, the regional one would provide trade-offs in this particular question as well, because the Egyptians on their own cannot possibly provide a long-term reconciliation between Fatah and Hamas. The hatred between the two is enormous, much more than they hate Israel. But in the long run, we cannot have 3 states for 2 people. We will have 2 states for 2 people, and Gaza and the West Bank will be a single territorial unit, and we have to aspire to that, and hope that reconciliation comes with the more practical approach of the new, relatively new leadership of Hamas. And we see a gradual process of being more practical and less associated with the Muslim Brotherhood within Hamas. Let's hope that it continues.
I'd like to make one. Thank you. I think you can see from this presentation the expertise that Gilead has had over elections, so we really thank you for this wonderful presentation. Thank you.